You're listening to the Alliance Specialty Podcast, dedicated to insurance and risk management solutions and trends shaping the market today.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to yet another Alliance Specialty Podcast. I am Brendan Hall, your host, Senior Vice President of the Cyber Vertical here. My colleague and friend, Chad Allen Neal. Chad, say hello to the broadcast.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, Brendan.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about this. It's one of my nerdy favorite things to talk about, not just cyber, but cyber specifically as it relates to M&A transactions and how cybersecurity kind of comes into play in that very context. Chad, this is an area you spend all your time focusing on, right? You've been doing this for a while. What is it about these transactions and these companies that are so attractive to, cyber criminals?
Brendan, that's a great question, and it's certainly something that we've seen, I'd say, over the last 5-6 years. We saw a pattern way back then that there always seemed to be a breach at one of the portfolio companies, and it always seemed to happen around the time that the private equity firm made some kind of announcement of the transaction. Right, so they might set out a press release that announces that they've just acquired so-and-so portfolio company, right? And it got me thinking way back then that, the cyber criminals were actually paying attention and they were using that as an opportunity because, look, they knew a couple things, right? They just got acquired by a new private equity firm. There's going to be quite a bit of money being transacted, right? You're going to have relationships between parties that are not very strong. In other words, the portfolio company doesn't know the way the private equity firm typically is going to transact when it comes to management fees or other types of requests for wire transfers. Then you combine those dynamics with the fact that most of these portfolio companies in the middle market have been so focused on building a business that they can ultimately find a buyer for, they really have not spent much, if any, time thinking about cybersecurity, right? They've been focused on what is going to make my organization operate optimally so I can go to the market and find someone that's going to be interested in acquiring this business. And unfortunately, cybersecurity has been down the list of things that they look from a value proposition. And a lot of the sponsors and the private equity firms that are acquiring these companies, they really didn't pay much attention to cybersecurity. 5-6 years ago, they just really started to think about IT and how they could use IT as an EBITDA lever to help valuation and value creation, right? But when they started to focus on IT, they weren't thinking about cybersecurity. And it's really only the last 2-3 years where you see cybersecurity being very much part of almost every transaction today, right? But even still, in those transactions, in due diligence, we will find all kinds of interesting things that are on the roadmap from a cybersecurity standpoint. But here's another problem that happens. After the transaction, the private equity firms are focused on legal optimization, financial optimization. So many times they never get back to all the things that were uncovered in due diligence from a cyber perspective and actually go address those things. So again, you're dealing with a company that is pretty nascent from a cybersecurity standpoint. There's a roadmap out there that nobody's really working. And the private equity firm is telling the world about this transaction and getting everybody's attention.
Wow, yeah. So there's a whole bunch of different risks that are being brought about there and not being paid as much attention to as they probably should. And as you say, we were just looking at this most recent Verizon breach report that so many of the controls are, these basic cybersecurity controls. It's not like companies that have very complicated and networks with multiple locations around the globe, but they've got tons of different technology platforms. It's really some of the basic stuff, right? The MFA and the things that the insurance carriers are really most concerned with. That's where I think we're seeing a lot of these breaches be prevented.
That's been the case, and it's one of the reasons I love working in this space and working with portfolio companies, because we talked about the fact that they have been focused on building a business and cybersecurity has been an afterthought, right? The good news is there are some foundational things that you can put in place across your portfolio that doesn't require a tremendous amount of investment, right? There's an investment, absolutely, but when you think about the prevention capabilities that these investments are bringing versus the cost of a breach, I call it a no-brainer, right? You've got to make these investments. But again, we're not talking about some super flashy, sexy cybersecurity solutions that are handling, a very particular attack, right? We're talking about the cyber hygiene. The Verizon breach report has made it clear year after year that 90% of all the breaches that they ever see come across the wire could have been prevented by that fundamental cybersecurity hygiene. So this is the way I like to think about it, right? There's two kinds of attacks in my mind, right? There's what I call the opportunistic attacks, right? Where someone is kind of poking around, see what they can find. Are there any, walking around the house? Is there a door unlocked? Is there a window unlocked? If they don't see anything, they move on to the next house, right? And they start checking the doors and the windows, and they're going to stop at the house that has that window open, and they're going to poke their head in the window, see what's in there. Oh, okay, there's a safe. Let's go in there, and so on. So those are the opportunistic attacks, and those are the kind of attacks that so many of the portfolio companies that I work with are spending so much time trying to respond to. And it's so disruptive because someone's clicked on a phishing email. They're not patching their system. So when someone clicks on that phishing email, there's a exploit for a particular vulnerability, and you've never patched that vulnerability in your system. Now that phishing attack has got a vulnerability that they can exploit. And now you've got a problem, right? And I would get calls from private equity firms every month or two, the same private equity firm, about a different portco that's had another breach. And I kept looking at these are things that are so easy to prevent. So, that's the message I always try to bring to the sponsors and their portfolio companies is, if you take care of patching, if you take care of MFA, if you require, some level of privilege access management solution so that your administrative accounts have got a couple layers of protection, including MFA, right? And go through some of those foundational elements, you can move the needle from a security posture and really go from zero to a very strong security posture in a fairly short amount of time and not a tremendous amount of investment. Now, conversely, the other type of attack, there's the targeted attack. Those are, the advanced persistent threats. Those are nation states. Those are difficult to defend against because if you have a highly motivated attacker, they're going to find a way into your network. And that's where, it becomes more of a focus to be able to detect that you've got something on your network, and therefore you can act and try to eradicate it. Today, if you talk to the FBI, they'll tell you that the average company, to figure out that they've got an active breach going on into their environment, it's somewhere north of 6 months before they can figure it out. And it's usually a third party like the FBI or maybe an angel hacker that's informing the company that they've got a problem.
Right. And slowly but surely over time, certainly starting with some of the larger sponsors and private equity shops out there, they're really trying to get a handle on risk across the portfolio. How are you seeing the nature of their role, private equity sponsor? You think it would be 100% in their core, but some of them have a different approach. Some are more like dictatorial, for lack of a better term, and some are, more kind of hang back and say, you guys, do whatever you want. So what do you see though as a, kind of an effective role for portfolio risk management as it pertains to what the sponsor should be doing?
Well, this has probably been the most interesting evolution that I've seen over the, probably 10 years now that I've been just 100% dedicated to working with private equity firms and their portfolio companies. And that's the quote unquote cultural change that you see at the private equity firm. When I first started in this business, Everybody wanted to talk to me about cybersecurity. Every sponsor, every private equity firm, if I came to them and said, "Hey, let's schedule some time to talk about cybersecurity," they would all take my meetings. They would all take a bunch of notes. But inevitably, when it came time to do anything about it, they would kind of sit back and say, "Look, it's really against our culture to force our portfolio companies to do anything or to work with anybody. We've acquired this business, we trust management to do the right thing, and that's the way we operate." And then I would get the phone call, 3 months later, and they'd be like, "Oh, we've got a problem at a Portco. Can you go help them?" Right. So over the years, there have been so many breaches at portfolio companies, and it's become more and more of a pain point. Besides the pain that the portco feels and the sponsor feels, right? You've got LPs out there, and the limited partners are wondering, what are the private equity firms doing to protect their investors as it relates to cybersecurity breaches at their portfolio companies. So the LPs are starting to put more pressure on private equity to move into more of a hands-on approach to this. You had a big push over the last couple of years around ESG. Well, cybersecurity and privacy are certainly part of an ESG program. When you think about governance and you think about the social aspects of an ESG program, right? Anybody that's talking about investing with ESG in mind, they need to be thinking about cybersecurity and actively monitoring how those portfolio companies are actually achieving those goals. So between the pain points, the fact that there's outside parties pressuring them, private equity now is pivoted, and you're seeing more of them taking a much more proactive stance around cybersecurity risk management. Now I'm actually working directly with these private equity firms and across their entire portfolio to help them monitor how their portfolio companies are performing from a cybersecurity standpoint. So we're not going in there and say, "Hey, you're going to work with Alliant and Alliant is going to be your cyber provider." Instead, we're coming in as a partner and working with the portfolio companies to benchmark what they're doing, give them credit for the things that they're doing and the partners they're working with. More importantly, help the private equity firm find those portfolio companies that are just lagging in putting a cybersecurity program together. And in that case, we've got different things that we do to help them bootstrap their cybersecurity program.
Yeah, no, exciting times indeed. And speaking of, the approach that you've developed here for our team managing cyber risk across the portfolio has been down selected as a finalist, right, for the M&A Advisory Awards.
That's right. That's right. So, we submitted our application for the Operating Partner Forum award ceremony that M&A Advisor hosts on an annual basis. It's in New York. We were selected as Product of the Year. That product, we call this portfolio cybersecurity surveillance, right? Where we look at the entire portfolio and we help to provide that oversight for the private equity firm. But we also, because of our very unique approach to mergers and acquisition services as a broker and a technology practice, we recognize as Firm of the Year because of that marriage of insurance questions as part of a deal and the technology and cybersecurity questions that we are helping to uncover and answer for our customers.
Yeah, it's great. Congratulations on them. We're waiting with bated breath for the announcements.
The exciting part is we've moved away from spreadsheets and PowerPoints, right? We've got this entire service tech enabled. So my customers can log in to see their entire suite of portfolio companies. They can get an aggregate view of how the collection of portfolio companies are performing, which ones are, lagging behind. It's very easy to see. But then they can also click in and see each individual portfolio company and see what our assessment results were. They can see the roadmap that we've created with the portfolio companies and how that roadmap is progressing over the course of a calendar year. So really excited what we've been able to bring to the market and the reception that we've received.
Yeah, we are in October. We might as well tell some spooky stories about recent things that you've heard of in the marketplace from clients. And it could be M&A, it could be cyber. What do you got?
Yeah, this is always fun, thinking about, the scariest portfolio company that I have come across in the last 12 months. The posture that we identified, but then the journey that we've taken them on, right? So both organizations that are in the healthcare space. When you think about cybersecurity and the kind of risks you're managing, first of all, the cyber criminals, those threat actors, they are actively targeting healthcare. The value of personal health information has always been more valuable than personal information like credit card information, social security information. They're actively targeting those organizations. They also know that unfortunately healthcare is focused on, they're delivering care, and they haven't always been great about securing the way that they're delivering the care. So things like ransomware attacks and loss of personal health information is a real problem. But I recently came into an organization where we found some real troubling strategies around their IT environment, and that has then had downstream implications on their security posture. So, for example, this organization has just always prided themselves on being able to do more with less, right? So things like getting corporate laptops with a enterprise professional version of Windows that was considered a necessary expense. So they're using the home edition of Windows across all of their endpoints, right? And that's impossible to secure from a centralized perspective. You can't push out policies and make sure all those endpoints are secure. They also decided, let's save a little money and let's not roll out an Active Directory, right? So, every one of their devices they need to go manage individually. Basically, that means they set them up, they load them up with their software, they deploy them, and they really can't manage them unless they get out in front of them, or they do like remote desktop, which is very insecure. This organization is also going through a lot of acquisitions, so the team out there is trying their best to put together a strategy. But because they're fighting so many fires, because they're constantly being asked to acquire another office, they've had no chance to really do all this stuff. So the good part about this story is because they were part of our oversight program, we brought these concerns to the sponsor. The sponsor acknowledged them and appreciated the fact that this may not be a company that they can afford to make a lot of investments in right now, just because where they're at in the life cycle of their acquisition. They are going to make sure that they're supporting some of the critical components that will help immediately move them into better security posture and prevent them from hopefully having any issue from a HIPAA standpoint. Because the last thing you want in the world is the Office of Civil Rights kind of breathing down your neck because you had a breach. So that's probably the scariest one I'd leave behind. But the good news is we've got them now with the roadmap that's very actionable, and they're starting to really move in the right direction.
Yeah, well, let's hope that keeps them safe and out of the spooky news. Well, that kind of covers everything we were trying to hit today. Appreciate everyone's taking the time to listen to us. And if you have any questions, you can obviously contact myself or Chad. Chad, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing everyone else out there.